Welcome to my first video on my channel. It's really about all the computers I've owned. So I'm going to split it into two parts. The first one being computers, the second one being consoles. I've owned a lot of machines over the years and a lot of games, and I still have a lot as well. I don't tend to buy these things for monetary gain. I tend to buy them because either I had them in my youth or growing up, and I sold them in order to buy the next machine. And then once I was able to afford it, I started buying them back. But I was pretty lucky in that I kind of got in before prices went sky high. So my first computer was a ZX81, like most people my age, I'm sure. Black and white, membrane keyboard, no sound, only had 1K of RAM. Yeah, that's right, kids, 1K of RAM. I then got a 16K RAM pack, which was like more memory than you could ever want. And I also got an upgraded keyboard for it as well. I didn't have that many games on it because tape loading was incredibly unreliable. I used to write programs in BASIC and machine code, and funny enough, that was kind of the initial push for me now to be in the software industry. The computer after that was a Spectrum, which I actually only had 6 months because, like a lot of them, mine went wrong. The keyboard membrane burnt out, and we sent it back to Sinclair for repair. And 3 months went by, which is a lifetime when you're 12 or 13, I may have been at the time. And eventually my dad rang him up and got a refund on it, and then came home one day with a BBC Micro, which I was absolutely amazed at. I was actually after Dragon 32, believe it or not. That was the machine I wanted, but he came home with a BBC Micro, which I used for a few years. Had all the classics on there: Elite, Revs, all the kind of arcade clones, Snapper, Defender, or Planetoid as it was known, which was a great machine, especially as you could do assembler inside BASIC as well, which was superb. I even got a disk drive for it as well, which made things much easier to load from. After that, I think I traded that in somewhere, and I bought, believe it or not, an Amstrad 6128, which I think I had the green screen, but I did get a modulator in order to plug it into a 14-inch TV. I really enjoyed that machine for a while, but I then moved on quite swiftly to what is probably the best 8-bit machine I owned, which was the Commodore 64. I had so many games for that, and there's so many classics on that. And it's probably, of all the machines I bought back and own, I've got the most games for, and I really went for kind of the cream of the crop. I've got about 5 tubs full of games. I've still got a working 1541 disk drive. I've got 2 track pads. It really is my favourite 8-bit machine. Then after that, I went straight to an Atari ST, which I really got because I wanted to use STOS, which was a game making tool for the Atari ST, and in fact I bought it with STOS, and I made a few games on that. Again, great machine until a friend of mine bought an Amiga, and then while I loved the Atari ST, I couldn't quite help think that the ST was a better machine. Amiga blew me away, mainly for its custom chips and the sound. And while I loved the Atari ST, I think it was a big mistake, although I know it was probably because of time, to put the same sound chip in that was in the Spectrum 128. After that, after I heard the Amiga, the Atari ST just sounded so bad. I quickly sold my Atari ST and I bought an Amiga 500, which was one of the, again, probably the best 16-bit machine I've owned. I had an add-on hard drive for it. Also had various bits and pieces. I even wrote a football management game, which I was in talks with Mindscape about to publish it, but it never kind of went anywhere. And then after that, really, I kind of got a PC, which was really, really good because I'd started work by that time, and I was writing software at work, so it made sense to have a PC. And had lots of games on that. When Doom came out, that was amazing. And then from that point, I've kind of always owned a PC, but I then kind of got bored of trying to make games work because pre-Windows 95, and even after Windows 95, trying to make some games work with interrupts before plug and play stuff came about. Making your game work on a PC was just hard work. So at that point, I got into consoles. First console I owned, funny enough, was Super Nintendo. I got it, funny enough, while I still had an Amiga, I think, and I didn't have that many games for it, and because I'd come from a computing background, the games were so ludicrously expensive. They were like 40, £50 when Amiga games were 20, 25. So I did take a lot of ribbing off friends for that. They couldn't understand why you'd buy a console with potentially inferior games, at least at the start. Over time, of course, that changed. But after Super Nintendo, I skipped the Mega Drive, fun enough, and I was never that interested in the Mega Drive purely because, again, the sound chip, the sound on it wasn't particularly great, or it reminded me so much of the Atari ST that I couldn't stand it. From the Super Nintendo, I bought an Atari Jaguar. Yes, I did buy one. I had that for about 6 months, and then the 3DO came out. I sold that and bought a 3DO, which is possibly one of my favourite consoles. It's got so many weird but sort of real gem of games. There's some cracking games in there. I then after the 3DO, I traded that all in and I bought a Saturn. Funny enough, I went into Future Zone, as game was called then, one day, and I went in there on the day that they released it. I think it was in May, and I just asked them if they had one, and they said yes. So I quickly went home, packed up all my 3DO stuff, and bought a Sega Saturn, which I owned for a while. And again, there's a pattern here. I tend to support the underdog. I had a Saturn for a while and then finally caved in, sold it all, which I regret a lot because I had some of the really, really best games for it, at least PAL games, and then bought a PlayStation, which was inevitable. So I had a PlayStation for a few years. Bought a Nintendo 64 when that came out. I can't really see. The Nintendo 64 had some good games, but if you were playing it on RF output, the anti-aliasing or the smearing was just horrendous. And now I think Nintendo 64 games look horrendous, at least if you haven't got an RGB mod. And from there, Nintendo 64, I then had a Dreamcast on day one, which I think, interviewed for the Crawley Observer. I don't live there. That was just where I happened to buy it from. Had a Dreamcast for a while, which was a great machine. Then just went through them. So after that, PlayStation 2, which I've got a lot of games for. GameCube, I've got a couple of those, I think. An Xbox, I've got one of those now soft modded, which I'll show in a future video. And yeah, from there I've basically had all of the consoles. So after the Xbox, you then went to the 360, which I didn't initially own. I had a PlayStation 3 on the first day that came out. And funny enough, the PlayStation 3 is the console that I've got the most games for. I've got what I consider, the cream of the crop on that. I haven't got any kind of filler games on that. I've just got all the best games, and I went for collector's editions and things on that. And again, I'll show that at some point. But the PlayStation 3 is really the machine I've got the most games for outside of 8-bit. And from PlayStation 3, I then got an Xbox 360 purely for the exclusives, which in hindsight has kind of bitten me in the backside a bit, which I'll come to in a second. But and then obviously from that point I had a Nintendo Wii as well, which again I've got a lot of the really decent games for. A lot of people think that the Wii is just waggle games or sports games, but there are some really cracking games for the Wii. I then bought a Wii U on day one, which I've still got, which I still use virtually every day. That machine is great, and it's a real shame it didn't take off as I think it should have done. But it's a great machine. And then from there, I got a PlayStation 4. And shortly after that, I got an Xbox One, which I then sold, and I got back the Xbox. I bought an Xbox One S, the 2 terabyte one, which is boxed in a cupboard somewhere. But I've now got the Xbox One X, which is a shame because the gen before that, the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, I favoured the PlayStation 3 for cross-platform games, even though at the time the 360 cross-platform games tended to be better, which is now bitten me in the backside because now that the Xbox One X is kind of my platform of choice for cross-platform games because they tend to be better. Because of the Xbox backwards compatibility, I haven't got a lot of the 360 games because I've got them on the PS3 instead. But as they're so cheap now, I may start picking those up. But in terms of collecting, I've kind of stopped because it's almost impossible now, at least down here on the south coast, it's impossible to find things at car boots and things. It just I mean, I haven't seen anything at a car boot for probably about 2 or 3 years. But now I kind of concentrate on current gen stuff because obviously current gen will be the future retro games, and also I've kind of diversified into like the mini consoles and things, and also things like Raspberry Pis, Odroid machines for emulation and that. So I'm more going a different way now to modern game. Although I will end up with a PlayStation 5 and things, but yeah, I mean this channel is kind of like it's going to be my love for gaming and kind of showing people that may or may not have seen this stuff some of the older machines, the games on them, and yeah, it's just going to be a channel about gaming, all sorts of things. So yeah, please like and subscribe if you like the video, and there'll be more videos coming along shortly. Thank you. Bye.